When my son Nathan called me that morning, his voice sounded softer than usual, almost rehearsed. "Dad," he said, "it's been too long. How about we go camping this weekend? Just you and me. Like old times." I remember smiling, even though my back ached from last night's storm cleanup. He hadn't invited me anywhere in years, not since he moved to the city with that new wife of his, the one who never looked me in the eyes. Still, I wanted to believe this was real. Maybe he missed me. Maybe he realized family mattered more than pride. So I packed my old green backpack, my worn tent, and a thermos of black coffee, the way Nathan used to like it when he was a boy. The drive to the mountains took 3 hours. Nathan's new truck smelled of perfume and new leather, like it had never seen dirt. He played music the whole way, too loud to talk. I tried speaking once or twice, but he only nodded, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Somewhere quiet. No signal, no people. Just us, Dad." His words should have comforted me. Instead, they made my stomach tighten. When we turned off the main road, the world grew quieter. No cell reception, no signs, just miles of pine trees and the whisper of wind through dead leaves. The truck bounced over roots and stones until the forest swallowed the light. Finally, he stopped near a clearing beside a narrow stream. The air smelled of cold moss and decay. Nathan got out, stretched, and looked around like he was searching for something. "This place'll do," he said. I stepped out, my boots sinking slightly into wet soil. "You sure it's safe? No bears or..." "Bears." He laughed. "Come on, Dad. Don't tell me you're still afraid of the woods." "I'm not afraid," I said. "Just cautious. You forget, I taught you to camp." He smirked. "Yeah, you did." We set up the tent together, though I did most of the work. He spent most of the time scrolling on his phone, pretending to help. By evening, we'd built a small fire. The orange glow flickered against his face, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. He handed me a cup of coffee. "To us, Dad," he said. I sipped. It was bitter, almost metallic. I forced a smile anyway. "To us." For a while, we sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of water. Then Nathan began talking, not to connect, but to remind me of everything I'd done wrong. "How's the old house holding up?" he asked. "Still full of Mom's junk." "It's not junk," I said quietly. "It's her memory." He sighed dramatically. "Dad, you've been living in that place alone for 15 years. You don't even use half of it. Why not sell it? You could move somewhere smaller, maybe closer to town." "I'm fine where I am." "Fine." His voice sharpened. "You're living like a ghost in that house, wasting the inheritance. I could have used that money too." He stopped himself, but the damage was done. I looked at him, really looked at him. His jaw was tense, his fingers twitching. There was no warmth in his words anymore. Just calculation. "I didn't know I was wasting anything," I said softly. "You think everything I worked for is yours to spend?" He looked away. "Forget it. I didn't mean it like that." But I knew he did. When I went to sleep that night, the forest hummed like a living thing. Crickets, owls, the far-off rush of wind through the trees. I felt uneasy, though I couldn't say why. Nathan had taken my phone earlier, saying, "Let's disconnect for a while." But he hadn't turned his off. Around dawn, I heard movement, the crunch of boots on dirt. "Nathan," I whispered. No reply. I stepped out of the tent, the air cold enough to sting. The fire had died, leaving only gray ash. The truck was running. Nathan stood by the door, a faint grin on his face. "Morning," I said. "Where are you going?" He looked at me one last time. The kind of look a man gives when he's already made peace with something dark inside him. "Meet Grizzly Bear," he said, voice calm and cruel. Before I could move, he slammed the door and drove off, tires throwing dirt into the air. I ran after the sound, shouting his name until my throat burned. But the forest only echoed it back to me. The silence that followed was worse than any roar. For a long time, I just stood there, an old man in the middle of nowhere, watching the dust settle where his son had been. Then I noticed something odd. He hadn't just left me behind. He'd taken my bag, my food, my flashlight, even my jacket. Only the tent remained. That's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. And the forest, vast, quiet, endless, suddenly didn't feel like nature anymore. It felt like a trap. For the first hour, I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, my mind blank. I stood there in the damp morning air, staring at the road that vanished between the trees, the same road my son had taken. It's strange what betrayal does to a man. You don't cry. You don't scream. You simply stop believing that the world you knew was real. When the shock passed, survival instincts took over. I was 68, but my body still remembered the old ways. The army drills, the long nights during storms, the hunting trips from my youth. I told myself, "You're not dying here, Elias. Not today." I gathered what little I had left, the tent, a few damp logs from the fire pit, and the half-empty thermos of coffee. The liquid inside was cold, but when I sipped it, it reminded me of warmth, of mornings when Nathan was 5 and used to climb on my shoulders just to see the sunrise. I shook that memory off. It hurt too much. By noon, the forest had changed its face. The light no longer felt golden. It was sharp and cold, filtering through endless rows of pines like a warning. Every step echoed. Every sound, a twig snapping, a crow cawing, made my pulse race. Then I noticed something strange. About 50 yards from camp, deep between the trees, there was a tree trunk marked with red paint, a straight vertical line. Fresh, not nature's doing. I moved closer. The bark was scarred, as if someone had dragged something heavy past it recently. Then another tree, 100 feet away, bore the same red line. I followed them, one after another, until I reached a small clearing. At the center lay an old metal drum, blackened by fire, surrounded by crushed beer cans and cigarette butts. Recent. Whoever had been here wasn't a stranger to this place. My stomach twisted. Nathan must have scouted the area before bringing me here. This wasn't spontaneous. He'd planned every step, right down to where he'd leave me. I sat on a rock, heart pounding, and thought about why. What could drive a son to leave his father like that? Was it about money? My house? My savings? Or was it something deeper? Resentment I never saw coming? I remembered the way he'd looked at me by the fire, like a man trying to convince himself he was doing the right thing. Meet Grizzly Bear. It hadn't been a joke. I didn't know if he'd meant it literally or as a cruel metaphor, but when the first low growl rolled through the trees that evening, I stopped wondering. The sound came from the north, deep, guttural, heavy. Every instinct in my body screamed run, but I knew better. Running meant noise, and noise meant death. I climbed a small hill and looked down toward the sound. The undergrowth shifted, just barely. Something big was moving there. I stepped back slowly, careful not to break a twig. By sunset, I was shivering. I had no food, no fire, and only my shirt to keep me warm. I found an old, hollowed tree trunk and crawled inside, wrapping my arms around myself. The smell of rot and pine sap filled my lungs. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the moonlight flicker through cracks in the wood and listened to the wind, to the forest, to my own heart. And then I heard something else. A car. Far away, faint, but real. My son's truck. I crawled out, stumbling toward the sound, branches cutting my hands and face. The headlights appeared between the trees for just a second, then vanished. He'd come back. "Nathan!" I shouted. My voice echoed into the night. "Nathan!" No answer. When I reached the clearing, the truck was gone again, leaving behind only fresh tire tracks in the mud and something else. A paper bag. Inside it, a piece of raw meat, wrapped in plastic. I froze. He wasn't feeding me. He was feeding something else. That's when it hit me. Meet Grizzly Bear. He'd left bait. I dropped the bag, heart hammering. The air suddenly felt heavier, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Branches cracking, the slow, deliberate crunch of something massive approaching. My breath turned shallow. I turned off my flashlight and crouched low, pressing my back against a fallen log. The darkness swallowed me. A shadow moved beyond the trees, tall, silent, impossible to mistake. A bear. A huge one. It sniffed the ground, huffed, and tore into the meat. The noise was wet and violent. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just waited, every muscle screaming for silence. When it finally lumbered away into the dark, I exhaled for the first time in minutes. Nathan had wanted it to find me, to finish me, but fate had other plans. Because when I looked down, I noticed something glinting in the mud, the corner of a plastic bag, half buried. Inside it was a folded document, sealed in a transparent sleeve. I recognized it instantly. The title read, "Power of Attorney Transfer, Elias Crowe." Signed, stamped, and dated yesterday. He hadn't just tried to abandon me. He'd already declared me legally gone. And that's when I stopped shaking. The fear turned to something else, something quiet, razor-sharp, cold as the mountain air. If Nathan thought the forest would bury me, he was about to learn something he'd forgotten long ago. The woods don't forget, and neither do fathers. When dawn finally arrived, the light looked nothing like salvation. It fell through the pines in broken stripes, gray, cold, almost metallic. I hadn't slept. My hands shook, not from fear now, but from a steady rage that had settled somewhere behind my ribs. The document I'd found, that power of attorney, lay folded in my pocket like a snake I couldn't let go of. My own son had already signed me away. He thought I was dead, or soon would be. And maybe he was right. But not yet. I tore a strip from my shirt and wrapped it around my bleeding knuckles. Then I looked at the forest around me, the same forest he thought would finish me. I'd built cabins, fished rivers, hunted storms. He forgot who taught him how to survive. He thought I'd die out here. He didn't remember I once belonged here. The first step was water. I followed the sound of a stream and drank until my reflection blurred in the ripples. My beard was thicker, gray dusted with dirt, my eyes sunken. I looked like a ghost. But ghosts have purpose. Next, shelter. I found a narrow ridge above a clearing, hidden between two fallen trees. I reinforced it with branches and bark, just enough to stay dry. I gathered dry moss for insulation, then used my glasses to spark a fire. It took an hour, but when the first curl of smoke rose, something like pride flickered inside me. The flames whispered like an old friend. I thought about Nathan then, about the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee, who once gave me a rock painted with the words, "World's Best Dad." He'd been 7. That rock still sat on my porch. What turned love into this? I tried not to imagine his wife's voice whispering in his ear, or the greed I'd seen in his eyes when he mentioned the house. Maybe he'd convinced himself it was mercy, that leaving me to nature was better than watching me fade. But no man decides when his father's story ends. By afternoon, I had a plan. If I wanted to make it out, I couldn't wait for rescue. I had to walk. The nearest town was probably 15 miles east, down the old Ranger Trail. But that meant passing near where the bear had fed the night before. I didn't care. I wasn't dying in silence. The trail was faint, but still there, the kind of path you feel more than see. Moss, broken stones, the smell of rain-soaked earth. Each step hurt, but I welcomed it. Pain meant life. Then I found tracks. Boot prints. Large ones. Not fresh, but not old either. 2 sets. One from boots, one from heavy tires. Nathan's truck again. He'd been back. I followed them. They led to a small ridge, where I found something that froze me mid-step. An old wooden sign nailed to a post. The paint was faded, but I could still read the words carved by a knife. Crowe Cabin, 1979. My own name. My cabin. I hadn't seen it in decades. Not since Nathan's mother and I built it during our first summer together. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to return. But somehow, Nathan had found it. The door hung half open. Inside, dust coated everything, but my old tools were still there. An axe, a saw, a rusted kettle. And a single photo on the wall. My wife, smiling, holding a young Nathan in her arms. I felt something break inside me then. Not from grief, but clarity. He'd used the place he knew I'd once loved as a tomb. But it wouldn't be mine. That night, I rebuilt the fire. I sharpened a wooden spear using the axe blade and carved notches into the handle. One for every day I planned to survive. Day 1. Day 2. I was still counting. I roasted mushrooms and caught a small trout using a bent nail and fishing line from the old supply box. As I ate, the forest spoke again. The groan of trees, the distant cry of an animal. The grizzly was still near, but it didn't scare me now. It was part of the plan. I whispered into the smoke. You tried to feed me to the beast, Nathan. You forgot that beasts don't always eat what's offered. Sometimes they wait. And I waited. Because I knew something he didn't. A man doesn't forge betrayal this deep and walk away untouched. Paper can declare a man dead, but the truth always crawls out of its grave. The forest would teach him that. 3 days passed. I followed the truck tracks downhill, closer to the valley road. My food was gone, but I didn't care. The anger sustained me better than bread. Then, late that afternoon, I heard the distant hum of an engine, familiar, rhythmic. I crouched low. Through the branches, I saw it. Nathan's truck, parked by the stream again. He stepped out, alone this time, looking around cautiously. He was checking if the body was gone. He walked toward the old campsite, scanning the ground. His voice cracked as he muttered, "Should have been over by now." I froze behind a fallen log, only 30 feet away. I could see every detail, his clean jacket, his polished boots, the way his hands trembled slightly. He thought I was gone. He knelt near the ashes of the first fire, poking it with a stick. Then he sighed, relief creeping into his posture. That's when I stepped out from the trees. "Looking for something, son?" I said quietly. Nathan spun around, eyes wide, color draining from his face. For a second, he didn't even breathe. "Dad?" I stood in the half-light, clothes torn, face streaked with mud and smoke. I must have looked like the ghost he expected to find. "I told you," I said, voice steady. "I taught you everything about these woods." He stumbled backward. "Dad, I can explain." But the forest around us was silent now, listening. And I realized something chilling in his eyes. Not regret, not fear of losing me. It was fear of losing what he'd already stolen. I took one step closer. No explanations, just answers. He looked like a man who'd just seen his own reflection in a grave. Nathan's lips moved, but no words came out. His eyes darted around the clearing, looking for an escape, not an explanation. The silence between us was so thick that I could hear the faint rustle of leaves falling behind him. You're alive," he finally said, voice trembling. I took another step forward, my boots crunching on dry pine needles. "You sound disappointed." He shook his head quickly. "No, Dad. I thought you were gone. I came back to look for you." "Is that why you brought raw meat? To look for me?" His mouth froze half open. The color drained from his cheeks. He didn't expect me to know. I pulled the folded document from my jacket pocket, the one he left near the bait. "You've been busy, Nathan. Signing papers, moving money, getting ready to bury me long before I hit the ground." He stared at it like it was a loaded weapon, which in a way, it was. "Where did you find that?" "Right where you dropped it," I said. "Funny thing, the forest doesn't eat paper." He swallowed hard. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to." "Supposed to what? Kill me?" "Dad, I swear." "Don't lie." I snapped, my voice echoing through the trees. "You left me here to die, Nathan. You didn't even look back." He froze, guilt flickering across his face like sunlight through leaves. But beneath that guilt, I saw something else, irritation. As if my survival had ruined a perfect plan. "You've got it wrong," he said, lowering his voice. "I was going to come back. I just needed time. There were debts, and I didn't have another choice." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "No choice? There's always a choice, son. You could have asked for help. You could have told me the truth." "The truth?" His tone sharpened. "You think you know the truth? You never cared, Dad. You sat in that dusty house for years, clinging to Mom's ghost, pretending you still mattered. You let everything rot. I had to build something for myself. For once." His words hit harder than I expected. I'd spent years alone in that house, surrounded by her things. Our photographs, her dresses, her perfume still faint in the air. Maybe I had been living in the past. But that didn't justify this. "So this is what you call building something," I said softly. "Stealing from the man who raised you." Nathan clenched his fists. "You don't get it. The house is worth $500,000, and the land's even more. I needed it, Dad. You're old. You don't need it anymore." The forest held its breath. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't need the house." He blinked, confused. "I don't need it," I repeated, stepping closer. "Because I've already lost the only thing that mattered inside it. But you?" I pointed at him. "You lost something worse. Your soul." He looked away, muttering something I couldn't catch. Then, without warning, he turned and ran. "Nathan!" I shouted, chasing after him. He stumbled over roots, branches snapping beneath his boots. I followed, breath ragged, every step a reminder that I was no longer the man I once was. But rage gives strength even youth can't match. When he reached his truck, he spun around, pointing something at me, a flare gun. His hands trembled, but the barrel stayed level. "Don't come closer," he shouted. "You don't understand what they'll do to me if I don't." "If you don't what?" He hesitated. His jaw tightened. "If I don't make it look real." "Who's they?" He said nothing. His silence told me everything. Someone had helped him, or worse, told him to do this. I raised my hand slowly. "Nathan, put it down." You don't have to do this. He shook his head, breathing hard. I already did. The flare fired. A blinding red streak cut across the trees, exploding in the sky. The noise echoed for miles. Birds scattered. Smoke rose above the canopy like a signal or a confession. He jumped into the truck, engine roaring. Stay away from me, Dad. He sped off, tires clawing at the mud, disappearing down the same road where he'd left me before. I stood there in the settling silence, the flare's red light fading above me like a dying star. And then, from deep within the woods, came the faint sound of an engine, not his truck this time. Another one. He wasn't alone. I hid behind the trees, watching as a second vehicle appeared, a black SUV, its windows tinted. Two men stepped out, both wearing leather jackets, the kind city men wear when they pretend to know danger. One of them carried a shovel. The other lit a cigarette and looked around. Think he's dead? One asked. Better be, the other said. The boss don't like loose ends. They started walking toward the cabin. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about greed or inheritance. My son had sold me off to someone far worse. The kind of people who don't forget unfinished business. I waited until they passed, silent as stone, then slipped deeper into the woods. My pulse was steady. My purpose, clear. Nathan thought betrayal ended here. But now, he'd given me something much stronger than rage. He'd given me names. And before this was over, every man who signed my death warrant, my own blood included, would learn that a father doesn't die quietly. The forest hid me better than any wall could. I moved like smoke between the trees, slow, quiet, invisible. The two men from the black SUV walked toward the cabin, their boots sinking into mud. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, a scar running down his cheek, kicked the cabin door open and stepped inside. Place looks empty, he said. The other man, shorter, with sharp eyes and a cigarette hanging from his mouth, smirked. Old man's probably bare food by now. Kid said it'd be clean. Kid. Nathan. I crouched behind a fallen pine, forcing my breathing into silence. The cigarette smoke drifted toward me, sharp and bitter. The tall man tore through my old shelves, tossing aside my wife's photo frame like it was trash. The glass shattered. Careful, the other said, stepping over the debris. Don't make it look messy. He said old man used to come here. Someone might remember. Relax, the scarred man muttered. Who's gonna come this deep? It's the middle of nowhere. He wasn't wrong, but they'd made one mistake, thinking nowhere meant safe. When they left, I followed. Not close enough to be seen, but close enough to listen. They walked to the SUV, started the engine, and began driving toward the trail where Nathan had gone. I stayed in the trees, memorizing the path. Every part of me wanted to storm that vehicle, drag them out, make them talk. But I knew better. Anger is loud. Revenge must whisper. For the next 2 days, I shadowed them. They camped half a mile down the old logging road. 3 tents, weapons, and boxes marked fuel. These weren't just collectors or hired muscle. They were cleaners. Their job wasn't to chase money. It was to erase evidence. One night, I crept close enough to hear their conversation around the fire. You sure the kid'll pay up? The scarred man asked. He will, the cigarette man said. He signed the transfer already. As soon as the death certificate clears, his bank account opens. Then we're done. And if the old man ain't dead, the cigarette ember glowed red in the dark. Then he will be, one way or another. I gripped my knife so tight my hand ached. They laughed, short, ugly sounds. I memorized their voices, their rhythms, the way they called each other by name. Ralph and Mickey. By dawn, I knew what had to be done. I spent that morning gathering supplies. Wire from the cabin roof, nails from the old shed, shards of glass, even fishing line. I built snares the way I used to when I was young. Simple, quiet, effective. By the time the sun rose over the ridge, I had transformed the forest into my ally. A branch that looked harmless was now a trigger. A hollow stump was a trap. It felt almost poetic. The same wilderness they thought would kill me was now the weapon I'd use to make them vanish. That night, I returned to their camp. Mickey was alone, smoking near the fire, his face lit orange and tired. Ralph had wandered into the woods to relieve himself. I waited until Mickey tossed his cigarette and turned to grab his rifle. Then I threw a rock behind him. He spun instantly, gun raised, walking right into the snare I'd laid across the logs. The wire tightened around his ankle. He screamed as he was yanked upward, hanging from the tree like a caught animal. Ralph came running, shouting, "Mickey!" I stepped out of the shadows before he could reach him. "Looking for your friend?" I said. He froze, eyes wide, realizing who I was. You're dead." I finished for him. "Not yet." He reached for his weapon. I swung the wooden spear I'd carved days ago, striking his wrist hard enough to knock the gun away. He fell backward, groaning, clutching his arm. I pressed the spear to his throat. "Talk." He spat blood. "The kid, your son, he said it was easy money. He needed 10 grand fast. We helped him fake the death, get your signature on that paper. He said you wouldn't last a night out here. And when you got the money?" He hesitated. "We were going to make it permanent. Easier for everyone." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Everyone but me. He tried to laugh, but my hand pushed the spear harder against his throat. "Where is he now?" Ralph coughed, eyes darting toward the dirt road. "Back in town, at the lawyer's office, making it official." I let go. He gasped for breath, wheezing. "You won't get far," he muttered. "We've got people waiting." I leaned in close. "Then I'll make sure they're waiting for ghosts." I hit him once, hard, and he slumped. Mickey was still hanging, unconscious. I cut the rope, leaving both of them tied together under a tarp. I didn't kill them, not yet. I wanted them to wake up and tell whoever sent them that the woods had changed their loyalty. By sunrise, I was gone. I followed the dirt road east, each step dragging me closer to civilization and to Nathan. The thought of seeing him again twisted my stomach. Part of me wanted to understand why. Another part wanted silence, justice, finality. At the edge of the forest, I found an old ranger station, half-burned but still standing. Inside, a working radio sat on the desk, crackling faintly. I turned the dial until I caught a signal. Local authorities still searching for missing man Elias Crowe, presumed dead after a camping accident with his son. My name, my story, already rewritten. My son's voice followed, trembling with fake sorrow. He slipped away near the river. I looked for hours, but I couldn't find him. My hand tightened on the radio until it cracked. I stared out at the sunrise, smoke curling from the mountains, and whispered to myself, if he wants me dead, then I'll give him the ghost he's looking for. A new plan formed in my mind, one quiet, patient, absolute. He wanted my name erased. I let him think it worked. Because a dead man can move in ways the living never could. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, my clothes were torn and my boots were bleeding at the seams. The road stretched before me, quiet and endless, cutting through the morning fog like a scar. I could smell the distant smoke of the town, exhaust, fried food, and life. I wasn't supposed to see it again. The sign read, "Welcome to Pine Hollow. Population 4,236. I used to take Nathan fishing near the lake here when he was 10. Back then, he used to brag about how he'd buy me a cabin someday when he got rich. I used to believe him. Now, I was coming back as a ghost. I walked into town as the sun climbed higher. People stared. A man covered in dirt, beard grown wild, eyes hollow. I kept my head down. The sheriff's station was only 3 blocks away. My name would be on their missing person list, and the last thing I needed was recognition. At the corner cafe, I slipped inside. The warmth hit me like a wave, mixed with the smell of burnt coffee and cinnamon rolls. A young waitress glanced up from the counter. "Sir, are you all right?" I forced a weak smile. "Been hiking. Got lost a while." She poured me coffee without another question. "Happens to folks every season. You're lucky the bears didn't get you." Her words lingered. "Meet Grizzly Bear." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, lucky." From the booth near the window, I could see the law office across the street. Harris and Webb, attorneys at law. Nathan had mentioned that firm once, bragging that his friend Daniel handled all his paperwork. I recognized the man stepping out of the building now. Tall, young, suit too new. He walked beside Nathan. My son looked like he'd stepped out of a commercial, clean, polished, alive. I wondered if he'd rehearsed his grief before coming here. He laughed at something the lawyers said, his hand in his pocket, relaxed. I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a quiet, razor-cold certainty. I left the coffee half-finished and followed them from a distance. They stopped at the courthouse. Through the glass doors, I saw Nathan hand over a folder, likely the death certificate. I waited outside, leaning against a bench, cap low over my eyes. When he came out alone, talking on the phone, I caught fragments of his words. Yeah, it's done. The money clears by Monday. No, he's gone, completely. I'll handle the rest. He paused, listening, then nodded. Don't worry. Nobody saw anything. He walked past me without a flicker of recognition. I watched him disappear down Main Street, toward the bank. Nobody saw anything. He was right. Nobody saw what I'd become either. That evening, I found an abandoned motel on the edge of town. The sign flickered. Vac NY. Room 6 still had a working lock and half a mirror. I washed in the sink, cut my hair with an old razor, and cleaned the mud from my clothes. When I looked up, the man in the mirror wasn't Elias Crowe anymore. He was older, leaner, harder. He looked like someone who could vanish and be believed dead. I took a deep breath and whispered to my reflection, let's see how ghosts spend money. The next morning, I visited the town clerk's office under a new name, Elias Crowe. I told them I was there to inquire about a property listing I'd heard about near the lake. The clerk handed me a brochure. Funny thing, she said, that used to belong to a man named Crowe. His son's selling it now, closing in a few days. I felt my pulse quicken. Really? That fast? She nodded. Yep. Word is the old man passed. Son's transferring everything through Harris & Webb. You'd better move quick if you're interested. I smiled politely. Oh, I'll move fast. That afternoon, I made a detour, the cemetery on the hill. Rows of fresh dirt mounds lined the quiet slope. My boots sank into the grass as I searched. Near the back, beneath a crooked oak tree, stood a temporary wooden cross with my name burned into it. Elias Crowe, 1957 to 2025. Beloved father, gone too soon. A fake grave. My fake death. I stared at it until the wind picked up, rattling the leaves. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. There was something almost poetic about standing over your own grave. I took the small rock from my pocket, the one Nathan had painted for me when he was 7. World's best dad. I placed it at the base of the cross. You'll get to keep the house, son, I whispered. But not the peace. That night, I broke into my own home. The key still worked. He hadn't bothered to change the locks. The air inside was heavy with dust and the faint scent of my late wife's perfume. My tools were gone. Her photo frames were missing from the mantel. Only the furniture remained, cold and stripped of life. I found a pile of mail on the counter, most of it unopened. Utility bills, bank notices, one letter from Harris & Webb confirming the final transfer of ownership to Nathan Crowe. At the bottom of the pile was something else, a note. Handwritten. Dad, if you're reading this, it means you made it out. Don't come looking for me. You wouldn't understand. I did what I had to do. Nathan. I stared at the paper, tracing the ink with my thumb. The handwriting was steady, not a hint of remorse. I folded it neatly, slipped it into my pocket, and whispered, You're right, son. I don't understand. But you will. By sunrise, I had my plan. If Nathan wanted to kill Elias Crowe, I'd let him succeed. The world already believed I was gone. But now that I was dead, I could do what the living couldn't. Move unseen, strike without warning, and take back what mattered most. His comfort, his certainty, his name. The forest had taught me patience. The world would soon learn silence could be the sharpest weapon of all. I walked out of the house, the morning light cutting through the windows, and didn't look back. Because the man who left that house behind wasn't Elias Crowe anymore. He was the ghost Nathan had created. And he was coming home. The town moved slow, like nothing had ever gone wrong here. Children biked past the courthouse where my death had been signed. Shopkeepers swept their porches, and the same sun that once warmed my family now shone on strangers. Nobody noticed the old man in a dark coat watching from the corner. Elias Crowe was gone. But Elias Crowe had work to do. I started with the lawyer. Daniel Harris, 28, clean-cut, overconfident, the kind of man who smiled too much when lying. I knew his type. He was the one Nathan called a friend, though I doubted friendship was ever part of their deal. That afternoon, I waited near the rear parking lot of the law firm. When Harris came out, adjusting his tie and talking into his phone, I stepped forward, limping slightly, playing the part of a weary stranger. Excuse me, I said, voice cracked, eyes down. You dropped this. He turned just in time for me to slip a folded envelope into his briefcase pocket. Oh, thank you, he said politely and walked off. Inside that envelope was a message written on cheap paper. I know the papers were forged. The forest remembers. No name, no signature, just enough to rattle a guilty conscience. By the next morning, half the town would know that Daniel Harris looked sickly and nervous. That was step 1, make them sweat. Step 2 was Nathan. He'd moved into a rented house on Elm Ridge. Newer, cleaner, surrounded by trimmed hedges and silence. Through the window, I saw his life. The glass furniture, the expensive suits, the fake smiles. His wife, Lauren, walked like she owned the world. Perfect hair, cold eyes. Every night, Nathan sat at his desk, opening the same folder. Financial transfers, insurance claims, and a letter from Harris and Webb confirming his inheritance. He looked proud, like a man who thought he'd outsmarted fate. But fate was sitting right outside his window. I didn't break in. Not yet. Instead, I started small, quiet disruptions. His mail began disappearing before he could read it. His car tires lost air overnight. A photo frame on his porch shattered one morning, though no one had touched it. Then came the phone calls. A soft male voice, recorded, distorted, whispering one sentence every night before hanging up. He's still in the woods. I didn't need to say my name. The words were enough. Within a week, Nathan had dark circles under his eyes. He checked the locks 3 times before sleeping. Lauren asked if he was all right, but he just said he was tired. Fear makes the proudest man crumble faster than any storm. One evening, I followed him to the local bar. He sat in the corner, nursing a whiskey, scrolling through his phone with trembling hands. I sat 2 tables away, hood pulled low, invisible among the crowd. "Man, you look like hell," the bartender said. "Just not sleeping well," Nathan muttered. "Nightmares? About your dad?" Nathan froze. "What did you say?" The bartender shrugged. "Heard about the story. Sorry for your loss. Must be hard." Nathan forced a smile. "Yeah, hard." He downed the drink and left. I followed him out into the rain. When he reached his car, I was already standing by the door. He jumped back, eyes wide. "Jesus, you scared me." "Didn't mean to," I said, keeping my voice deep and unfamiliar. "You dropped this." I handed him an old photograph, one from years ago, of him and me fishing by the lake. He stared at it, pale as ash. Where did you get this?" "Found it near the forest line," I said. "Funny thing, looked recent." Then I walked away before he could speak. That night, Nathan didn't sleep at all. Through the open blinds of his living room, I saw him pacing, calling someone on the phone, probably Harris. "Someone's playing games," he hissed into the receiver. "They know about the forest, the papers, everything. I swear, if this comes back to me." He stopped, listened, then slammed the phone down. I smiled in the dark. Step 3 was working. A week later, Harris's name hit the local paper, attorney under investigation for forged estate documents. Someone, an anonymous informant, had sent evidence to the county authorities, including recorded calls between him and Nathan. I'd spent a night in the lawyer's office retrieving them, his passwords easy to guess. Nathan panicked. I could see it in every frantic movement, every call unanswered. His car sat parked for days. He barely ate. Lauren packed her bags after their first screaming argument. And then came the letter. I left it on his doorstep, inside an unmarked envelope. "Nathan, some debts can't be paid with money. You gave me to the forest. The forest gave me back. Dad." That night, he called the sheriff. I watched from the shadows as 2 patrol cars arrived. He tried to explain about the calls, the letters, the voice, but all they saw was a nervous man talking about his dead father haunting him. When they left, he stood at the window, face pale and hollow, staring into the darkness like he expected something to emerge from it. He wasn't wrong. A few days later, I returned to the forest one last time. The wind carried the same cold scent of pine and rain. I stood where he'd left me, the same patch of dirt, the same silence. I buried the power of attorney papers beneath a pile of stones, along with the photo of us fishing. Then I whispered to the trees, "Debt settled." When I returned to town that evening, I saw Nathan's house surrounded by flashing lights. An ambulance, a stretcher, Lauren crying on the porch. Nathan had been found unconscious, alive, but broken. Overdose, they said. A mix of sleeping pills and whiskey. I didn't feel triumph, just quiet. Because revenge isn't always about killing. Sometimes it's about showing a man the mirror he spent his life avoiding. I walked past the chaos unnoticed, the wind at my back, my new name still on my tongue. Eli Crowe. Alive. Forgotten. Free. And as I disappeared down the street, I thought to myself, maybe ghosts aren't meant to haunt the living. Maybe they're meant to remind them that the living once had hearts, too. The days after Nathan's fall felt like living between two worlds, one that remembered me as a dead man, and another that no longer recognized me at all. The newspapers ran the story with their usual mix of pity and spectacle. Local man suffers breakdown after father's tragic death. They painted him as a grieving son crushed by guilt, not the architect of betrayal. Maybe that was justice. Maybe it was irony. I didn't correct them. Dead men don't write letters to the editor. I rented a small cabin by the edge of the lake, the same one Nathan and I used to visit when he was a child. The owner, an old widow named Martha, didn't ask for much. I paid cash. She gave me the key and a jar of blackberry jam for luck. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that hums against your ribs until you realize it's not the world that's empty. It's you. Each morning I chopped wood, fished, cleaned, cooked. The routine steadied me, but it didn't bring peace. Every swing of the axe felt like cutting through memory. I tried to convince myself it was over. Nathan was alive, broken, and alone, the way he'd left me. The men from the forest were gone. Harris was under investigation, and I had survived. But survival isn't the same as living. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the water, Martha stopped by the cabin with a basket of bread. "You've got the look of a man who carries too much," she said softly. I smiled faintly. The woods have a way of keeping secrets. She studied me, squinting. "Secrets don't stay buried forever, Mr. Cross." Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the reflection of the moon rippling across the lake. I thought about the moment Nathan drove away, his laughter fading behind the trees. I'd told myself revenge was justice, that by breaking him, I'd restored balance. But balance doesn't heal. It just evens the pain. 2 weeks later, I found a letter slipped under my cabin door. No return address. Just my name, Eli Cross, written in shaky handwriting. "I know it's you. You're alive. Meet me at the cemetery tomorrow at noon." And, for a long time, I just stared at it. My first instinct was to burn it. But curiosity, or maybe something softer, won. The next day, I went. The air was heavy, the sky the color of wet stone. Nathan was there, sitting beside my grave, head bowed. He looked smaller, thinner, stripped of arrogance. His hands shook as he turned when he heard me approach. "Dad," he whispered. The sound of that word nearly undid me. It had been years since he'd said it with meaning. He stood, unsteady, eyes glassy but clear. "I knew you wouldn't die. I felt it. I kept hearing your voice in my head." I said nothing. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he continued. I thought if you were gone, everything would be easier. I was drowning in debt, and they promised." "I know what they promised," I interrupted quietly. "And you believed them." He nodded, tears cutting through the dirt on his cheeks. "I did. And now everything's gone. Lauren left. The money's frozen. Harris won't talk to me. I see your face everywhere. I see you in my dreams." I stepped closer, my voice low. "Then maybe that's the only thing keeping you alive." He swallowed hard. "Are you here to finish it?" I looked at him, the same boy who used to bring me wildflowers and say, "These are from Mom in heaven." I saw the man he'd become, lost, desperate, hollow. "No," I said finally. "I'm here to forgive you." He blinked, confused. "Forgive me. Not for you. For me. I can't carry this weight forever." His voice cracked. "I don't deserve that." "You don't," I agreed. "But neither did I deserve what you did. We both live with ghosts, Nathan. I'm just done feeding mine." He fell to his knees beside the grave, my grave, and sobbed. I wanted to reach out, to touch his shoulder, but I couldn't. Some distances can't be closed with a gesture. When he looked up again, his face was raw, broken. "What will you do now?" I looked out at the horizon where the forest met the sky. Live quietly, maybe for the first time. He nodded slowly, like a man who'd finally heard something true. I left him there, kneeling beside a name that no longer belonged to me. Back at the cabin, I packed a small bag, some clothes, a knife, my wife's photo, and the painted rock that said "World's Best Dad." I set it on the windowsill. That night, I built a fire and watched it burn until the logs collapsed into glowing embers. The crackle sounded like distant rain. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. Just a deep, aching peace. I whispered into the night, The forest took me once. Maybe it gave me back so I could learn what forgiveness feels like. In the morning, I left the cabin key on the table beside Martha's jar of jam. The world outside was bright, clean, full of sound. As I walked toward the bus station, I passed a father teaching his little boy to fish at the lake's edge. The boy's laughter rang out across the water. The man smiled, patient, proud. For a moment, I almost stopped. But ghosts don't interrupt the living. I walked on, my shadow stretching long behind me, disappearing into sunlight. Elias Crowe was gone. Eli Cross was gone. Only a man remained, one who had finally learned that the greatest revenge is peace. The road out of Pine Hollow curved like an old memory, winding through hills that had seen too much. I'd walked that way many times before, once as a father, later as a ghost, and now as something in between. The bus stop sat on the outskirts of town, next to an abandoned fruit stand with a hand-painted sign that read fresh peaches, $2 a basket. The paint had faded years ago, but the words still clung on, stubborn, like life itself. I was leaving Pine Hollow behind. But before I did, I had one last thing to do. Martha had been kind when no one else was. She didn't pry, didn't question why a quiet man with no past had suddenly appeared on her property. She just brought bread, jam, and silence. In this world, kindness like that deserves the truth. So that night, before dawn, I sat at her kitchen table, the one that smelled faintly of soap and cedar, and wrote my final letter. The paper was rough, the pen shaky, but the words came steady. Martha, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where I was always meant to go. Not to heaven, not to hell, just forward. My name isn't Eli Cross. It never was. My real name is Elias Crowe. You might have heard that name once in town, whispered like a ghost story. They said I died in the woods. In a way, they weren't wrong. My son left me there. He thought money could bury blood, that a signature could erase a lifetime. But the forest didn't take me. It changed me. It showed me that revenge is easy. It's forgiveness that costs something. I've done things I can't take back. I scared him, broke him, made him see himself through the eyes of the man he betrayed. But when I looked at him, broken and lost, I realized I'd done the same thing to myself. You once told me that silence keeps secrets. Maybe you're right. But sometimes silence also heals them. Thank you for the bread, for the jam, for treating a stranger like he was still human. If anyone asks about me, tell them the truth, that the man who came to Pine Hollow wasn't running from death. He was walking toward peace. Elias. I folded the letter, placed it inside a small envelope, and left it on her table beside the half-empty jar of jam. The morning air was sharp as glass when I stepped outside. Fog clung low to the fields, the world quiet except for the occasional caw of a crow overhead. My namesake bird, I thought. Always watching. Always alone. At the bus stop, a boy no older than 10 sat with a fishing rod leaning against his knee. His boots swung above the dirt. You heading out, mister? He asked. I smiled faintly. Yeah, I think it's time. He grinned. My dad says only people who did something bad leave this early. Your dad's not wrong, I said. But sometimes, people leave to stop doing bad things. He thought about that for a while, then offered me a small piece of candy from his pocket, a lemon drop. I took it, thanked him, and watched him run off toward the lake. The sweetness hit my tongue like sunlight after a storm. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes and a puff of dust. The driver barely looked up as I climbed aboard. Where to? He asked. Doesn't matter, I said. Someplace quiet. He nodded, tore the ticket, and waved me toward the back. As we pulled away, I looked out the window one last time. Pine Hollow grew smaller. The diner, the courthouse, the crooked steeple, the road that led to the forest. And there, at the edge of the trees, I thought I saw a figure, tall, thin, head bowed. Nathan. He wasn't chasing me. He was standing still, watching. Maybe he'd come to say goodbye, or maybe it was just my mind giving shape to forgiveness. Either way, I didn't wave. Some things are better left unspoken. Miles passed. The forest gave way to open land, and the sunlight spilled across the horizon like a promise. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. I wasn't Elias Crowe the father, nor Eli Cross the ghost. I was just a man who had made peace with his pain. The hum of the bus became the rhythm of my heartbeat. The lemon drop melted on my tongue, leaving only a trace of sweetness, fleeting but real. Maybe that's what life is supposed to be. Back in Pine Hollow, Martha found the letter later that day. She read it twice, her eyes wet, and smiled through her tears. When the sheriff came asking about the man who'd rented her cabin, she handed him the envelope and said, "He's gone where he was always meant to be." The sheriff frowned. "Where's that?" Martha looked toward the forest, its tall pines swaying gently in the wind. "Home," she whispered. As the bus disappeared beyond the ridge, a crow landed on the guardrail, black feathers gleaming against the light. It watched for a moment, then lifted into the sky, vanishing into the gold of dawn. And somewhere between the woods and the horizon, a man finally laid his ghosts to rest. Years passed before Pine Hollow spoke the name Elias Crowe again. By then, the forest had grown thicker, swallowing old paths, hiding its secrets under layers of moss and time. The town changed. New people, new shops, new gossip. But the woods never forgot. It started with a story. Every summer, tourists came to fish by the lake. One of them, a journalist from Chicago, wrote an article about the ghost of Pine Hollow. He'd heard from locals about an old man who had supposedly risen from the dead, walked the streets unseen, and then vanished again. The article spread online, drawing curious visitors. They came searching for legends. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew that ghosts don't haunt to scare, they haunt to remind. Nathan Crowe still lived in town, though few recognized him now. He kept to himself, managing a small repair shop by the edge of the main road. His hair had turned gray early, his shoulders hunched from years of carrying invisible weight. Every morning before sunrise, he walked to the cemetery with a small bouquet of wildflowers, the kind his father used to pick for his mother. He placed them beside the old wooden cross that still read, "Elias Crowe, beloved father, gone too soon." The cross was weathered, the letters fading. But Nathan never replaced it. He said it was better that way, like time had accepted the truth. Some mornings, he sat there for hours, talking softly to the wind. "I still hear you, Dad," he'd whisper. "In the trees. In the silence. I know you forgave me. I just don't know if I ever will." No one disturbed him. The townsfolk had learned not to. One autumn afternoon, Martha walked up the hill carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. She was older now, her hair silver, her steps slow but steady. When she reached the grave, Nathan was already there. He looked up, surprised. "Martha?" She smiled gently. "I thought you'd be here." He nodded. "I come every day." "I know." She placed the parcel beside the cross. This was his. He left it behind before he went. "I kept it, thinking one day you might be ready." Nathan hesitated, his fingers trembling as he unwrapped the paper. Inside was a small, round stone, smoothed and painted years ago. The words were faded but still visible. "World's best dad." Nathan's breath caught. "I made this for him when I was a kid." "I know," Martha said softly. He carried it until the day he left. He stared at the stone for a long time, his thumb tracing the chipped edges. "He forgave me, didn't he?" Martha nodded. "Long before you asked." Tears filled his eyes, but for once, he didn't hide them. "I tried to make peace with him. But the silence, sometimes it feels heavier than punishment." "Maybe that's the point," she said. "Peace isn't quiet because nothing's wrong. It's quiet because we've said all there is to say." Nathan closed his eyes, the autumn wind brushing through his hair. He used to say the woods remember. Martha smiled faintly. "And they do." That night, a storm rolled through Pine Hollow. Thunder cracked over the hills, and rain swept across the town like cleansing tears. When dawn broke, the world was washed clean, and at the edge of the forest, the path to the old Crow cabin reappeared. The locals said it had been gone for years, swallowed by brush. But there it was, clear as day, marked by a single crow feather stuck upright in the mud. Nathan followed it. The air was damp and heavy with pine. When he reached the clearing, the cabin stood silent but whole. The door creaked as he stepped inside. On the table, untouched by time or dust, lay a folded note, yellowed but perfectly legible. "Son, if you ever find this, it means you came back. I didn't build this cabin to keep the world out. I built it to remember what it gave me. You were my world once. You can be again. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's learning how to live with what remains." "Dad." Nathan sank into the old wooden chair, clutching the note to his chest. The air smelled faintly of smoke and pine sap, as if the fire from years ago still burned somewhere deep in the walls. For the first time since that day in the forest, he didn't feel haunted. He felt held. When he left the cabin, the morning light filtered through the trees like gold dust. A crow perched on the roof, watching him. He looked up and whispered, "Tell him I'm still trying." The bird tilted its head, then flew toward the lake, a black shadow against the silver water. Nathan followed the sound of its wings until he reached the shore. The lake was still, reflecting the sky, the trees, and one solitary figure that seemed to stand beside him for just a heartbeat before fading into the mist. Elias Crowe. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was simply there, a quiet echo in the place where betrayal had turned to forgiveness. Nathan smiled through his tears. "Goodbye, Dad." The mist thickened, then lifted. The forest went silent again. Years later, when Martha passed away, the townspeople found her journal. Inside, among her notes and recipes, was one simple entry written in her careful hand. "Some ghosts don't come back to haunt us. They come back to guide us home." And under it, a small drawing. A crow perched on a branch, wings half open, watching the dawn rise over Pine Hollow. The forest still stands today. The cabin still waits. And when the wind moves through the pines just right, the people who live near the lake swear they can hear a low, calm voice whisper, "The woods remember."